meeting number 45 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, known far and wide, of course, as the mighty OGGO. Today we're continuing our study on Buy Canada. We have witnesses in person but also online, so colleagues, please, if you're directing questions, please specify who, whether it's to our witnesses in person or if it's our witnesses online. Today, just a gentle reminder to keep your microphones or your headphones away from the microphones. Don't touch the microphones. And a reminder as well, it's for all of us, myself included, not to speak super fast so that we can have proper translation provided. We've got several opening statements, so we'll start with in person with the CFIB. Ms. OGGO, please, for 5 minutes. Before we start, everyone, because we have so many opening statements, keep it to the 5 minutes because I don't want to have to cut you off, but I will. Ms. OGGO, welcome to OGGO. Please go ahead.
Great. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having CFIB to appear here today. CFIB is a nonpartisan, non-for-profit organization representing more than 103,000 small, medium-sized enterprises across every industry and region of Canada. My name is Michelle OGGO. I'm our Director of Trade, Marketplace Competitiveness at CFIB. And so generally speaking, SMEs do support the objectives of straightening domestic supply chains, especially in the context of the ongoing trade tensions and tariffs pressures facing Canadian businesses. The federal government's efforts to advance a Buy Canada approach are certainly a reasonable response aimed at supporting domestic industry and economic resilience. But it's important to make sure that SMEs are included. Federal procurement needs to be accessible not just to large firms, but also to small businesses that drive jobs, innovation, and local economies. Today, SMEs are operating in a very challenging environment, shaped by trade tensions, higher costs, labor challenges, and growing regulation. Canada is also facing an entrepreneurial drought, where more businesses are closing than opening. Fewer owners are willing to invest, expand, or encourage others to become entrepreneurs. In fact, CFEB data shows that 55% of small business owners would not recommend starting a business today. Procurement can be a powerful economic lever, but only if it improves access, increases competition, and supports SME participation. Only 12% of CFIB members are currently involved in selling goods or services to the federal government, with businesses in retail, wholesale, and construction more likely to participate. However, significant barriers in awareness and participation remain. Based on CFIB surveys sent to our members just last week, preliminary data here regarding the new Buy Canada policy, we found that 5% of SMEs said that they were aware of new federal procurement opportunities and had actually applied. 31% were aware but did not apply, and 51% were completely unaware that these opportunities existed at all. The same survey showed that 77% of SMEs agreed that federal procurement rules tend to favor large firms over small and medium-sized businesses. 66% agree that even with the Buy Canada policy, procurement process remains too complex for their business to participate. 71% agree that lowering minimum contract size would make procurement opportunities more helpful for small businesses. These results highlight a consistent message from SMEs. The effectiveness of a policy depends not just on the intent, but whether the system is practical, accessible, and easy to navigate. A Buy Canada approach can help strengthen domestic supply chain, regional development, and expand opportunities for Canadian businesses. However, we are concerned that many SMEs may still be left out. The $5 million threshold coming into effect on June 15 is still very high for many SMEs, meaning that many will not be able to access or benefit from these new opportunities. Key way to improve access for small businesses is to debundle contracts, allowing SMEs to compete for smaller, more manageable opportunities. SMEs continue to face administrative burden, for example, obtaining a security clearance, preparing policies that go beyond the occupational health and safety mandatory requirements, such as supplier codes of conduct, ethics policies, etc. These requirements can discourage participation in federal procurement. This points to the need for simpler tools, standardized template, and scaled requirements for smaller firms. Another key concern with the Buy Canada approach is the risk of focusing too narrowly on the raw material while overlooking Canadian SMEs and the broader economic value that they do generate. As a result, small firms that create Canadian jobs, economic activity, could be excluded from Buy Canadian procurement opportunities. To reflect the operational realities of SMEs, the eligibility should instead focus on ensuring that Canadian-owned operated businesses, regardless of where their inputs are sourced, have access to the Buy Canada policy. Finally, we're also concerned that conditions such as project labor agreements, union-exclusive community benefit agreements, and prevailing wage requirements tied to specific collective bargaining structures would reduce competition and make it harder for small businesses to participate. In conclusion, SMEs support the intent behind the Buy Canada policy, but it must work for businesses of all sizes, not just the large ones. To achieve that, government needs to improve awareness and accessibility of procurement opportunities, reduce any structural or administrative barriers, and ensure fair, competitive access for SMEs across the country. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Is it Ms. Cobden? And you're going to do 2.5 and share?
Share with Janko. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for having John and I here today. I'm Catherine Cobden, the CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association. John and I are very pleased to join you to discuss the importance of the Buy Canadian policy to the Canadian steel industry. First, let me say the Canadian Steel Producers Association represents 100% of Canada's domestic steel production from Alberta through Quebec, as well as significant steel users in our downstream market. One of them, Janko Steel, joins us today and will be sharing our 5 minutes. Canada's domestic steel industry generates $15 billion of economic activity and supports 123,000 direct and indirect jobs across the country. As I sit here today, you will be aware that we are facing the most consequential trade action by the United States, with 50% 232 tariffs on all Canadian steel exports. These tariffs have now been in place for over a year. In 2024, the U.S. was the destination market for over 6 million tons of steel. Today, our shipments to the U.S. have plummeted. We're now down 60%, and over 1,000 workers have lost their jobs. In the face of this threat, the domestic industry's core strategy has been to pivot to the domestic market by addressing unfair steel trade in Canada and increasing market opportunities for Canadian producers. This is where the Buy Canadian policy fits in. Mandating domestic steel in federal procurement for construction and defense projects gives us a much-needed market opportunity when we really, really require it. The government adopted appropriate thresholds and requirements in the policy, including proving that steel has been melted and poured in Canada, that will ensure the policy meets the intent. We urge comprehensive implementation of the policy across all federal departments, relevant federal transfers, and grants and contributions. We look forward to assisting the government to make sure that exemptions are granted in limited circumstances that cannot be met by the domestic industry. We hope all levels of government in Canada will follow the federal lead and introduce mandated steel requirements that are melted and poured in the country. In closing, I would like to say the domestic industry does not believe this policy will create supply chain shocks or uncompetitive price escalations. We can produce what the country needs. We have the scale. We have the capacity. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Janko. Just 2 minutes, though, please. Go ahead. Or I'm sorry, I apologize, Mr. Young. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. I would like to thank the chair and the House Standing Committee for the invitation to speak here today on behalf of Janko Steel. I've worked for 38 years in the steel industry and in a commercial capacity, and also with my role right now as a member of the Trade Subcommittee on the CSPA. Janko is a steel service center with production and manufacturing capacity located in Stony Creek, Ontario. We employ 325 Canadian workers, have over 600,000 square feet of plant space, and we serve the North American market. 99% of the coil and plate that we purchase is always purchased from the 4 Canadian steel mills. We truly value their partnership. Traditionally, 30 to 35% of our business was sold into the United States, so you can imagine how challenging the past year has been for us, navigating the landscape of punitive steel tariffs. This Buy Canadian policy is welcomed by Janko. In fact, we've already seen some benefits from this policy with an increase in inquiries requiring melted and poured Canadian steel and a general feeling in the market that investment in manufacturing is being supported by the government and industry. From our perspective, we are navigating an evolving global trade landscape, and the Buy Canadian policy can immediately stabilize domestic markets. Canadian manufacturers will now have the opportunity to participate in federal projects where bids will consider the value of using Canadian materials produced by Canadian companies benefiting Canadian workers, a goal that we feel is aligned with the country's spirit of standing together, supporting our neighbors, building relationships that will drive demand for Canadian materials and goods. Canada has the steel production capacity to support this policy from mill to manufacturer. Where products are not domestically produced, we encourage creative dialogue within the Canadian manufacturing base. Engineered sections and beams using made out of domestic coil and plate are a notable example. Our steel industry is under attack. We need support, and this policy is a strong step forward. Buy Canadian is a logical and necessary policy. Without a strong, healthy steel industry, our country's sovereignty is threatened. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Prévost, please. Go ahead, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et chers membres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I represent the Manufacturing Center. I am the Director in Public and Government Affairs for the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Quebec. So we have a network of over 1,000 manufacturers of all sizes throughout Quebec, and we collaborate with manufacturers and exporters in Canada. It has existed since 1871 to defend the manufacturing sector. So from a manufacturing perspective, this policy can yield a number of significant benefits. First, it can strengthen domestic demand for goods manufactured here. And it can secure and deepen Canadian supply chains, which is particularly important in a context of trade and geopolitical volatility. Third, it can encourage productive investment, innovation, and the development of industrial capacity in Quebec and Canada. That said, a poorly designed national preference policy can also miss the mark. It's important to have it be a useful industrial policy lever to build Canadian manufacturing capacity, improve the resilience of supply chains, and maximize the economic value created in the country. In a context marked by fragile supply chains, the rise of industrial policies among several trading partners, pressure on economic sovereignty, and the need to strengthen our manufacturing base, the manufacturing sector welcomes the modernization of public procurement. By considering not only the lowest bidder, but also economic benefits for the country, the ability to respond in the event of a crisis, the creation of quality jobs, and the preservation of Canadian industrial expertise. Regarding the government's ability to meet its need for goods and service, the policy can enhance the government's capacity when it helps develop a more stable and reliable domestic supply. In certain sectors, especially those where supply security matters, a Canadian supplier offers a real advantage in terms of lead time, compliance, and risk management. However, the right question is not just how much does it cost to purchase. We must also ask, what is the cost of a supply delay? What is the cost of excessive reliance on foreign supply chains? What is the cost of losing strategic industrial capacity in Canada? And what portion of public spending returns to the economy in the form of jobs, investment, and innovation? The procurement policy we are discussing today will have varying effects depending on the sector. In sectors where Canada and Quebec already have a solid manufacturing base, the policy can have a very positive effect. So, Buy Canadian should enable in Canada's strong manufacturing sectors, justifying investments to improve productivity and production capacity, promoting local innovation, strengthening domestic value chains, and enhancing the ripple effect on all small businesses in Canada. An approach tailored to each of Canada's major manufacturing sectors is needed. Some sectors have a smaller presence in Canada, and investments to develop this production capacity are necessary. Such investment should be to assist them. So this would take into account existing production capacity, growth potential, and the sector's strategic importance. Public procurement is not always sufficient to build sustainable manufacturing capacity. For this policy to truly support manufacturing companies, it must be linked to investment programs, innovation measures, support for automation and productivity, and guidance for SMEs. There must also be investment in workforce training. So this policy is promising, but it must be viewed as part of an industrial strategy, not as an isolated measure. It can encourage national industrial development, but only if accompanied by other tools to help the manufacturing sector directly. To adequately support Canadian manufacturing companies, the following must be taken into account: production capacity in Canada, value added created in the country, and sector-specific criteria. However, care must be taken not to impose a disproportionate administrative burden, especially on SMEs. The goal is not to require a 100% Canadian product in all cases. The goal is to ensure that a significant, verifiable, and economically meaningful portion of the value remains and is produced in Canada. In conclusion, for the Quebec and Canadian manufacturing sectors, the Buy Canadian policy can be a very useful tool for strengthening our industrial base, securing our supply chains, and better anchoring economic value within the country. However, its effectiveness will depend on its implementation. If the rules are clear, tailored to specific sectors, proportionate, and accompanied by measures to support investment and productivity, this policy can generate real benefits.
Way past our time. Would you finish up, please?
That's all right. I'm done. You can go ahead.
Wonderful, thanks. We'll start with Mrs. Block for 6.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My first question will be for Ms. Auger with the CFIB. When we look at highly integrated supply chains for many of our SMEs on both sides of the border, do you foresee there being adverse effects with rigid content restrictions and the costs to small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, our data does show that SME integration with the U.S. has been built for years, right? They've built in place business contracts that they cannot easily get out of. They have their supply chains. They've got customer relationships. And despite a lot of our data showing that a lot of Canadian SMEs are diversifying, in fact, 50% of SMEs have said that they are moving away from the U.S. market as much as possible from their supply chain, there still is a significant amount of SMEs that just cannot lose that reliance on the U.S. market for supplies, for their inputs to their business operation. And, we have been hearing under different jurisdictions where some small businesses get blocked out of procurement opportunities just because their inputs or part of their inputs in their business come from the U.S. or come from elsewhere. In fact, a local business here just in Ottawa recently was blocked out of a municipal opportunity because parts of their inputs in building parks for our communities were from the U.S. And I think that goes back to the message where I was saying that, we got to look at the economic contribution that small businesses make in our communities. And this business operates, has, I think, close to 20 employees. There are engineers. These are good paying jobs, but then are losing out on these economic benefits, right? So these are where we need to leverage those added value components that while not every little piece might be Canadian raw material, we need to ensure that those businesses can compete fairly for those procurement opportunities. And as the federal government is setting that sort of gold standard for other jurisdictions, we just want to see that being applied across the boards fairly.
Thank you very much. That certainly is consistent with what I've heard from small and medium-sized businesses when it comes to the Buy Canadian policy. I know you mentioned this in your opening comments, but I want to give you an opportunity to elaborate on the broader restrictions in procurement, particularly with requiring perhaps unionized labor and how this may affect small and medium-sized businesses from participating in federal procurement.
Right. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. What we are seeing and what we saw from the last federal budget is that certain federal funding programs are preferring unionized labor over sort of just any business to be able to apply. We know that about 96% of SMEs in Canada are not unionized. And that goes for, even construction businesses. They are legitimate businesses with legitimate workforces. And they just want to be able to compete for procurement opportunities. In the federal budget, there was a communities benefit funding program that was announced, and in it said that they would favor unionized laborers for those types of agreements. So we're giving taxpayer money to support a very small subset of our Canadian businesses. So we need to make sure that the level playing field is open to all businesses to compete on procurement. And again, the federal government is setting that standard. We're seeing across jurisdictions, even in BC, there was a bill put forward where they would prefer unionized labor for certain construction projects. And we're really just hoping that the government realizes that there are different types of businesses and they are legitimate and they create jobs, they create, contributory economy.
So yet at our last meeting, we heard that the government is planning on creating a office for small and medium-sized businesses when it comes to Buy Canadian. Have you been involved at all in any consultations and been able to provide some of this feedback to the governing members?
So we have, but it wasn't until we specifically reached out to ask who was working on developing this program. Just last week, we sit on the Supplier Advisory Committee, which is an industry group of representative that helps advise the government on procurement policy programs. We did get a snippet of what they're looking at doing, but it does still feel like it's still very much in an initiation phase where they're not too sure what direction is going to be taken.
And one final question. For small and medium-sized businesses, how much of a dollar stays in Canada as opposed to large multinationals?
So for every dollar spent, 66 cents, every dollar spent at a small business, 66 cents does stay within the local community, whereas only 11 would stay within the local community if it's spent at a large multinational. This is part of our messaging because there is a lot of federal procurement or federal purchasing that does not go reported, especially those lower amounts under the $10,000 threshold. And there is an opportunity here that while it's not directly procurement related, it's still federal government spending, it's purchasing. And there's an opportunity for the federal government to maybe put some kind of guiding principle for all departments to consider that when there's non-compete procurement opportunities or purchasing under that $10,000 value, that they're supporting local, they're supporting small businesses, and really be the champions.
Thank you.
Sorry.
We'll go to Mr. Danko, and I know it's Danko, not Janko. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to welcome our witnesses this morning. It's probably no surprise I'm going to spend my time talking about steel and the steel industry. As a representative from Hamilton, Canada's Steel City, MP Hefner is also here as another Hamilton representative. The steel industry, as was noted, is a significant employer. In Hamilton specifically, it's 10,000 direct jobs, 40,000 indirect jobs in the city. And I thought it was interesting in your opening remarks that both of you referenced Buy Canadian as an opportunity for steel producers and manufacturers in Canada to really expand their domestic market. So my first question, Ms. Cobden, if I could start with you, is what is the current state of the steel industry in Canada in terms of domestic sales versus international imports, and why is that such an opportunity for steel producers?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. For sure, the domestic industry battles every day for a level playing field, competitive level playing field with offshore imports. The most recent data is showing that we have about half of the domestic market, and offshore imports and imports from other from the U.S., for example, represent the other 50%. That shows us we have a significant opportunity to grow the market share for domestic industry. In the U.S., for example, their market share is closer to 80%. So we are quite a gap, and I believe the number is quite similar in the EU as well. The EU, their domestic industry is about, I believe, 75 to 80%. So Canada, obviously, as compared to those two trading partners, if you will, or we are not anywhere near those levels of market share.
Thank you. And there's a number of support programs for tariff-impacted industries, like steelmaking being probably, if not the most tariff-impacted, definitely one of the most. There's the Strategic Response Fund, Strategic Innovation Fund, Regional Tariff Response Initiatives, the large there's a whole suite of supports for industries that are significantly tariff impacted. And Mr. Young, I'm going to come to you with a question because you mentioned building Canadian capacity into areas that are currently not available. You specifically mentioned Canadian sections and beams. I'm old enough that my steel construction handbook is from the 90s and it still has sections from Algoma Steel in it. But I wanted to ask you, what opportunities are there for Canadian manufacturers and producers of steel to bring back some of that production capacity, which we no longer do here?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Danko, for that question and comment. I did actually listen to a session I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, where you mentioned when you served as a consulting engineer, one of the frustrations was you found that, it was price-centered and maybe it didn't help the local economy, the national economy in this case. And then maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe maybe you mentioned the Algoma old book. You may have found at times that there wasn't any creativity in how possibly there could be local supply for some jobs. That example that when I said we've already seen benefits, there are webs and flanges that are being produced for pre-engineered beams. That business, actually, we have actually seen an order now, we just completed it, that would have typically gone from the United States, and that is because of a Buy Canada policy, it would had to be melted and poured in Canada. So I think if we get creative with this type of engineering, there are a lot of slick coil plate from Algoma, all the coil from Algoma and the other 3 mills in Canada. We can produce a section that can be used. Some can't be for bridges, as you would know what the specs are, but a lot can be used for buildings and then also base plates, etc.
If I have time for one final question. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Chair. My last question would be, Ms. Cobden, I think there's a lot of, obviously we're in a trade war with the United States. There's a lot of conflict with the United States. But for the steel industry in particular, there's also a lot of things that we have in common with the United States steel market. And interests in Canadian producers and American producers are more aligned than they are different. I was wondering if you could expand on some of the common ground that we have with the North American steel producers.
Thank you very much for that question, and it puts me in the position of being able to explain why there's strong alignment with the U.S. industry despite the tariff war, in the sense of we are fighting the same challenge. The global challenge of overcapacity, predominantly out of China, is frankly one of the reasons why the Trump administration put the tariffs in place in the first place. The Canadian domestic producers face the exact same problem. So our hope is through the USMCA and CUSMA discussions that we will see, a return to what we have had in the past, which is standing shoulder to shoulder with the Americans to fight this global overcapacity challenge that destroys our domestic markets in each of our countries. So that's the ultimate objective. But it's hard to predict how that will play out.
Thanks very much. Madame Gaudreau.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. At the outset, I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'd need more than an hour with you. I'll begin with Ms. OGGO. You talked about seeing more closings than openings. What about businesses? When we talk about entrepreneurship, is this a potential threat, or on the contrary, is it an opportunity to maintain our industrial capacity? Thank you for the question. I would say it's not necessarily just now that we're seeing a decline in businesses closing. This is data we used in an analysis we published in April from Statistics Canada that show that aside from the pandemic, we're in the most difficult period for small and medium-sized businesses. Our entrepreneurs who are CFIB members, they tell us their costs have gone up on each line. There's no respite. And then with what's happening with the United States, all of their costs have gone up as well. And they're absorbing the costs, but there's no reprieve. So the focus now for small and medium-sized businesses is that for the government to understand that the programs that were put in place to support some industries aren't necessarily accessible to them. Yes. So it means we need specific tools, investments to manage the risk. Yes. We've submitted our brief for the budget to the Finance Department, and in our brief we had a series of recommendations to provide assistance, to give them a break with their costs, and there are also specific recommendations about the investments we'd like to see to support SMEs. So I'd be pleased to send it to you. Yes. Yes. I look forward to reading that. Mr. Prévost, my time is going. You talked about necessary investments. I understand that you're calling for a cross-cutting industrial policy. Buy Canadian can't be just one measure. There has to be support for small and medium-sized businesses.
Améliorer la progressivité.
Oh, can you hear me? We hope.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Can you hear me well? Yes? Great. I apologize. So, as I was saying, the policy must be
Innovation et améliorer la productivité.
improve productivity. So we need an industrial policy.
Monsieur le Président, qu'on est aussi
Mr. Chair, is there interference here?
So please. When did you readdress the question?
Oui. Donc, on se reprend.
So we'll try again. We hope it'll work this time. How is it important to have a cross-cutting industrial policy? Exactly. We need to take into account the reality of each manufacturing sector in Canada to reduce its dependence and improve resilience for the supply chain. So the policy must be accompanied by support for innovation to improve productivity and innovation in manufacturing businesses. So there have to be other measures, not only a review of public procurement. In terms of perception, Ms. OGGO, do you think that Canada is concerned enough with the gradual loss of all of its decision-making centers, its champions? In Quebec, we're trying to keep them at home. But what do you think about that? A lot of data from the CFIB show that SMEs feel forgotten by the federal government. They feel that programs were large-scale investments. We see a lot of investment in big plans, a lot of investment in certain sectors, but SMEs in Canada feel pretty forgotten. Their costs continue to go up. There's no break for them, no investment program that really helps SMEs who've also been hit by tariffs, regardless of their sector. So measures, this would be about unbundling things. Is that what you're talking about? Yes. For procurement, there's the context. I have a great example. from a group of members who are in audiovisual. There's one contract that was from the federal government for American companies. It was a few years ago. But what did that mean? With tariffs, point of order. At the end of the session, we're tired. It's in French. There are extraordinary witnesses, and there's noise. Out of respect for the witnesses, if colleagues are going to discuss something, I would ask them to do it outside. I apologize. So they feel a bit forgotten. They don't have access to government services because the contract was so big they weren't able to compete. But if you look at at the contract by region, if it had been done more locally, SMEs could have competed. And then by regions, it would have helped SMEs in those regions to compete and to have investments and in the supply chain. So there's a lot that could be done to look at how we can ensure that contracts are the right size and take into account the context of the region and where the SMEs are. We'd hope to see that respected. Thank you. I hadn't stopped. Can I ask a question to Mr. Prévost? Okay, great. I was very surprised, Mr. Prévost, when Ms. OGGO said 50% of businesses didn't even know it existed, didn't know that they could compete in a call for tenders. What do you think of decentralizing and unbundling things? Well, it would give an opportunity to smaller businesses to compete for those contracts. I think it should be better publicized as well, but it would support all businesses, no matter their size, if they had the opportunity to apply. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Ms. OGGO, I just wanted to start with you. We heard from a witness at our last meeting that it can sometimes cost up to $400,000 for a business to be able to bid on a contract just to find out that they didn't even get the contract. So just wondering, are your members experiencing the same thing?
I can't give you a specific number, but what I can tell you is that the amount of time required into just filling out and getting through the process just increases costs for small businesses, right? You're asking, for documentation that are not OH&S requirements. So it's like extra things that a business would not have in place. They don't have HR departments. They don't have legal departments to help go through all the paperwork and the requirements, right? So they're spending so much extra time just making sure that they've even filled everything out. And there is this concept too from the SME world where, you're filling everything out, but the federal government might prefer the best price over what is actually the best value overall and the solution that's needed for that procurement opportunity. That comment has come back to us several times when we look at qualitative data, that they just feel like the federal government's going to go with the sort of cheapest option.
Just kind of wanting to, I think the question was asked earlier, but just kind of wanted to build off of it a little bit. It was spring of 2026 was the target for the small business procurement program. And I mean, we're into June already, and there's still no movement on it, really, right? So, what signal does that send, though, to the SMEs that you represent that are maybe looking to get into this procurement game?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there are delays. I think it goes back to some of the federal government approaches currently being focused on large scale investment, large businesses, and again, maybe not focusing necessarily on those small, medium-sized businesses that are really struggling at a time where trade tensions, tariffs have been affecting them for the last year and a half. We have been in discussion with that department and the bureaucrats, but it is still very much an initiating kind of idea of what's going to happen for supports for SMEs. And even as it rolls out, I'm interested to see how it will all play out. But we are well past the deadline. I mean, June 21st is when summer starts, right?
Yeah, exactly. We saw a report recently, too, that business investment in Canada has actually gone down for 5 straight quarters. And when you see, a delay in implementation like this, what impact does that have for those businesses that just aren't investing?
Yeah, small businesses are not right now looking to invest. They don't have extra cash flow. They're really just staying afloat at this time. There's no cost reprieve for small businesses. There's very little targeted measures for those who have been impacted with tariffs. There are certain sectors that have been focused on, but small businesses are also kind of feeling left out to fend for themselves at this time when every operational budget line has increased.
I've heard a concept, and it's a very popular buzzword to say a shovel-ready project. But I've heard the concept now of rather than shovel-ready, because that means hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases millions of dollars in permitting and engineering, just to find out you don't get approved. But rather a shovel-worthy project. So is a company already, do they meet criteria, or do they have capacity? That would mean that they are worthy, and would be a lot easier then to get the certainty that they need to get the contract and then spend on the engineering and all of the pieces that would be needed because they already have proven that they have the capacity. Do you think that would be a better approach?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it could help, certainly, but, there's still delays with getting clearances on the security clearance. It takes so much time. So it certainly is something worth looking at, whether or not you can get a database of businesses that are shovel ready or ready to provide. That would be great. But what that looks like and the added extra paperwork that comes with that too, without even being guaranteed a procurement opportunity, would be something to think about.
Okay, and then just lastly here, just again with the bundling issue there, again, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but do you have any further comments on that? I know it was touched on earlier, but just there's almost like a reverse incentive if it's not fixed.
A little bit, you're right. I just think there's opportunity where we don't create a monopoly, where it's one business that owns one large contract. And what I was trying to say here on the AV side is it's now pushing out a lot of AV companies in Canada to go out of businesses because they cannot, in BC, participate in EV services for federal regulated buildings. And so they don't have access to those ones, even if they wanted to. And if that contract would have been sort of debundled and localized, it would have given opportunity to more businesses across the country to be able to compete on those contracts. So I think it's just looking like it's not every circumstance I'm saying that needs to be debundled, but it's looking at what is the ultimate goal with these contracts, and are there several businesses that could fill those gaps?
Thank you.
Does it have to be one? Could it be three? Right?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Ms. Setz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses who've joined us today. I think I'll start either with Ms. Cobden, or perhaps if Mr. Cudahy wants to join as well in the responses. It strikes me, in a lot of the discussions with industry over the last year, particularly with Canadian steel producers, that there has been discussion as well around the environmental advantages of Canadian steel production. And I'd love to hear a bit about how sourcing steel domestically, of course, in light of the Buy Canadian policy and the objectives around Canadian materials, supports economic outcomes we're striving for, but also environmental objectives. Either.
Perfect question for John.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, so when we look at Canadian steel, we're talking about steel that can be produced in different ways, and those different approaches have different, for example, greenhouse gas emissions pathways associated with them, but they're producing different products. When we look at the primary two manufacturing processes, so blast furnace steel versus scrap-based electric arc furnace steel, Canada is ranked first in the world on a greenhouse gas emissions intensity basis for blast furnaces, and third in the world for electric arc furnaces. So we're producing some of the best steel in the world from an environmental perspective.
Amazing to hear, and I think we don't trumpet that quite enough, frankly. I think it's important in the current context, as obviously we strive with the Buy Canadian policy to drive support for these Canadian materials, but the environmental objectives are incredibly important in that consideration as well. Perhaps back to either one of you. At a time where we are seeing many countries pursuing industrial strategies and domestic procurement preferences, such as we've done with the Buy Canadian policy, how important is it for Canada to be using procurement as a strategic tool, specifically as we've done in specific industries and in building that supply chain resilience?
It's extremely important. So thank you for that question. The one, just based on the conversation we've been having today, the point I'd like to underline to answer your question is the role that a steel plant, for example, as an anchor in the local economy, particularly for SMEs. The steel industry, and I'm sure that MP Danko knows this very well, but there's a significant amount of SMEs that pop up around these massive anchor plants like a steel plant. So the Buy Canadian policy will help to ensure domestic market for the domestic industry and thereby support the domestic supply chains, many of which are SMEs.
If I may add briefly to that too. So one of the fundamental, we've talked about the melted and poured in Canada, and one of the fundamental benefits of the way the federal government has approached the materials policy is that it's not just about, it's certainly melted and poured, which is very important for our producers, but that also speaking to fabrication in Canada. And so it's that continuity throughout the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And to that supply chain resilience, right? Building that capacity, but also predictability as we move forward, which I think is so important. And maybe with that, I will pivot online to Mr. Young. Building on that comment around predictability, how important is that predictability of domestic demand from major public procurements? How important is that in helping Canadian companies predict, future demand, make the necessary investments and confidence in their own operations and their workforce?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to answer that. We are in a situation where Janko Steel's 30 to 35%, let's say, of our business that was always going to the States. We would be anecdotal, I think, of the entire industry, even up to 60%, let's say. Some mills in moments in time would have been sending that much steel into the United States. All of us made those decisions for infrastructure and how we were building our business strategically, thinking there would be a free border. That has come to us now to say, okay, you can't count on that. So to your point and your question of
Mr.
how
Young,
important is it?
I have to interrupt.
Yes,
We're past our time. Are you able to just finish up quickly?
Yeah, so it is extremely important. We are in a time that is just extremely nuanced, I guess, as far as feeling like there's I'm being mindful, Mr. McCauley.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
I have to cut you off there.
No.
Perhaps you can provide a lengthier response in writing. It would be appreciated.
Of course.
Thanks. Madame Gaudreau, 2.5.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's incredible. I'm trying to think out loud, telling myself, how can we get through the pressure from the lobby? It's very difficult for small businesses to be competitive. I'm going a little bit further. How will we be able, with a measure like this one, with all of the filters necessary, when we look at the players who benefit, and maybe you're not aware of this, but I'll tell you, at the Ethics Committee, for weeks, we've wanted to put in place, the Prime Minister has about 2,000 shares, and we want to put an anti-conflict of interest screen in, and it's not being accepted, and it won't be accepted. How can a small business deal with that? There are major players, lobbyists, big pockets and interests. How do you compete with that? I'd like to hear you on that, Mr. Prévost and Ms. Auger.
Chicanez-vous pas, là.
Either one of you. Go ahead, Ms. Auger. Okay. Yes, thank you. From the CFIB's perspective, we have a lot of data and we try to share as much as we can with members, with federal departments. And it seems that, yes, entrepreneurs aren't necessarily, well, big investments are made and eventually they make their way down the supply chains. But we have to ensure that the business climate today supports SMEs so that future entrepreneurs want to create businesses in Canada. Currently, that's not the case. We're seeing fewer and fewer businesses start. So the foundation needs to be there for SMEs. It needs to be a competitive environment for SMEs. Mr. Prévost, we need to be clear. When you're not aware of something, you don't compete for it. When 50% of people aren't aware with SMEs, well, I have my doubts. What do you think of everything that doesn't come back to us in decision making?
But as previously mentioned, maybe you can put your thoughts down in writing and send to the clerk and be distributed and included in our report. Mrs. Jansen, please.
I cannot help but notice that whenever the Liberal government creates a program, it seems to help the biggest companies while ignoring the small businesses that actually drive Canada's economy. For example, the steel industry, who's here with us today, is about $4 billion, which contribution to Canada's GDP. Small and medium-sized businesses contribute hundreds of billions, something like 300 times more. SMEs make up 99% of all businesses in Canada. They employ nearly 2/3 of private sector workers and generate roughly half of our economic output. If the goal is to strengthen the Canadian economy, create jobs, and increase productivity, where would we get the biggest return? By creating another targeted program for a handful of large companies, or making it easier for millions of entrepreneurs and small businesses owners to grow, hire, and invest? What makes this even more frustrating is that often these large businesses, take again as an example steel industry, largely foreign owned, well over 50%, whereas SMEs are truly Canadian businesses. They're owned by Canadians, rooted in their communities, and reinvest their profits here at home. Yet they're the last to receive attention. The government calls this strategy to support Canada. But when a program is designed around a relatively small segment of the economy, while businesses that generate half of our GDP are largely left out, it raises a fair question. Are we really focusing on where Canada gets the greatest economic benefit? Because if we want a stronger economy, the biggest opportunity isn't at the top, and no shade on the steel industry. It's in the millions of small and medium-sized businesses that keep our country running every day. So my question, Michelle Auger, as we sit here today, can a Canadian SME clearly identify what new opportunities this Buy Canadian initiative creates for them?
Our data says no. Just that, preliminary data is showing that. The qualitative data that we've also received in our June survey shows that the opportunities that do exist are entirely too complex for them to apply. It's not worth the time and effort. They don't have the extra staff, the cash to do it. And you're completely right. Canadian SMEs are the foundation of our communities across the country. They're the first to try to keep their doors open, keep their staff employed for as long as possible, even through the tough times. And there really does need to be a bit of a shift in focus here on Canadian SMEs, because when you look at what programs have been announced to support SMEs, you've got the regional development agencies and the RTRIs. But again, the criteria are so different from one to the other that you're picking winners and losers. And so we just need to make sure that when programs are being created, whether it's procurement, that the intent allows for good policy programs that make it easy for SMEs to get there. And so, yes.
Have you seen any evidence that procurement has become simpler for SMEs since the Buy Canadian announcement?
there hasn't been a lot announced yet for small businesses.
There's not even information for them.
You can go online, but the thresholds are so high right now on the Buy Canada policy that a lot of the contracts are not reflective of SME realities.
So would you say that reducing barriers is often more valuable than creating a new subsidy program?
The red tape is certainly one of the top priorities for small businesses, something to address at the federal level. We've been calling for removal of red tape for small businesses, getting them templates, streamlining those processes, even looking at, reducing the amount of paperwork that is required needs to be taken into consideration.
My husband and I started with just the two of us in business, and I can tell you that we never, ever went to try and get any of these programs because it was impossible. I had exactly that question. Would reducing paperwork help SMEs compete for a government contract? I know the big guys, they have like a whole team, like a massive team that can do this. If SMEs represent 99.7% of our economy, why are we not helping them with a program?
Number one ask when it comes to procurement. The number one complaint we do here is around, how do I create an ethics program? Like, it's not something that's required under health and safety mandatory requirements, right? And there are no templates. A business owner just has to kind of Google online, what's an ethics program, and put it in place just to meet the requirements of a procurement program, right? And there are a lot of those that are depending on the procurement where it almost seems a little bit like you're checking a box by handing in something that you've implemented within your business.
So really quickly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gasparo, please. I ask you folks to watch your own times, please. Mr. Gasparo?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. In regards to the CFIB, and I have a great deal of respect for entrepreneurs who are starting a business and trying to make it in a global economic environment that is constantly changing. And I have a lot of respect for the work you do. Everyone who's come in here supports the Buy Canadian plan. I'm assuming you support it. Sorry?
Our members do, yes.
Great.
In theory.
Our government has brought in policies to try to help small businesses, and it was briefly alluded to. The Regional Tariff Response Initiative. We allocated $500 million to it. We've increased it, giving small businesses access to working capital, expanding into new markets, adjusting, helping SMEs adjust their supply chains and operations that are impacted by tariffs. And we have streamlined that application process, and there's more work to do. So connecting the Buy Canadian plan, which is evolving, but we are trying to get as many Canadian companies involved in that by, again, and you touched on some of the work that's still left to do. But connecting the Buy Canadian plan to the Regional Tariff Response Initiative and programs like it is exactly what we're trying to do, to create that bridge for SMEs while we navigate, which everyone agrees, a changing global economic environment so that they can be prosperous moving forward. So can you touch on the linkage between programs like the Regional Tariff Response Initiative and Buy Canada?
So yes, on September 5th last fall, the RTRI had been announced as a measure to help support SMEs. When you start digging into the details of the various programs, the RDA were responsible for setting their own set of criteria by across the country. We know that the awareness level on the RTRI was quite low. We have specific data, and I'm happy to circulate that data to the committee post. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but the awareness level remains incredibly low. We know that 72% of our members, regardless of the sector that they're in, have been impacted by tariffs in some form. However, when you look at...
Can I just interject? Whose fault is that? Isn't that your job to make sure that your members know what programs are out there? Like it's like, look, we have to get that information out there.
Correct.
And you have, members of Parliament like me and others have tried to get that information out. right? But that's your job.
Have you looked at the criteria? Some of the criteria ask
Sorry,
for 10 employees.
Excuse
You
me.
need 10
Excuse me. You just said.
Business.
Sorry. You just said that there hasn't been enough uptake, and that your client members don't know about it. Whose job is that? That's your job.
They don't qualify because you need 10 employees. In
No,
BC.
you need.
In Quebec, you need to be only in manufacturing. They don't qualify. That's the problem. This program was targeted to small businesses. If you're in retail, you cannot apply at all.
It's 5 members or more. It's not 10. And I might add, that's part of your job to communicate to your members.
We have communicated those programs.
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, hold on just a sec.
It's
Stop the
programs
clock.
picking losers
Sorry,
and winners again.
I'm sorry, Ms. Auger. Your point of order, Ms. Johnson?
I think it's very disrespectful when Ms. Auger is here explaining what the problems are with the program and she's being badgered. Attacked is a better word.
We'll restart the clock. Mr. Gasparo?
I have no further questions.
That is our time. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a few moments, bring in our new witnesses. We have 3 opening statements to get through, so we'll try and keep it short as suspension. We're suspended. Session. We'll start with our opening statements. One of our witnesses that we have for Unifor has not logged on yet, and we're trying to locate him, just so you're aware. But we'll go ahead and start in the meantime with our witnesses who are here, and we'll hope to get them on board. So we'll start with opening statement from Mr. Kustrasov. Welcome. You have 5 minutes. Colleagues, just like before, because we have people online, please state who you're directing your questions to. Please, sir, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Noel Katruzis. I serve as a business manager for the Millwright Regional Council, representing 10,000 highly skilled millwrights across Canada who install, maintain, and repair the equipment that powers Canada's economy. I also serve as president of the Hamilton Brantford Building Trades Council and vice president of the Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin, and Grey Building and Construction Trades Council, representing an additional 30,000 skilled trades workers across Ontario. I'm here to speak to one central point today. A true Buy Canadian policy must include Canadian skilled trades labor, not just Canadian materials and manufacturing. Canadian workers must be at the center of Buy Canadian. When we talk about Buy Canadian, the focus is often on goods, steel, equipment, materials, but those products do not install or maintain themselves. It is Canadian skilled trades workers who build, assemble, install, and maintain the infrastructure and industrial systems that these investments depend on. If public funds are being used for projects in Canada, there must be clear requirements. Work is performed by certified journey persons and registered apprentices. Trades are recognized under provincial and territorial trade designations, and qualifications meet interprovincial or Red Seal standards where applicable. Without these protections, Buy Canadian becomes incomplete and risks excluding the very workers who deliver these projects on the ground. Canada has built a world-class skilled trade system through apprenticeship training and interprovincial standards. Billions of dollars have been invested by governments and industry into workforce development, including programs such as the Union Training and Innovation Program, otherwise known as UTIP. However, there are no consistent requirements tied to federal funding to ensure these standards are upheld on publicly funded projects. This creates a gap where work may be performed without proper certification, trade standards may be undermined, and public investment in training is not fully utilized. We should be maximizing that investment, not bypassing it. Another critical issue is the use of international labor mobility pathways that allow foreign workers to enter Canada for industrial installation work. We have seen this on major projects, including facilities such as the Nexstar project in Windsor, Ontario, and similar concerns are emerging with the upcoming developments like the Volkswagen PowerCo plant in St. Thomas, Ontario. Foreign technicians are brought in through mechanisms such as business visitor provisions for after-sales service, intra-company transfers, and international mobility program streams tied to free trade agreements. These pathways are intended for highly specialized, proprietary work. However, there is growing concern that they are being used to perform general skilled trades work that Canadian millwrights and other skilled trades are fully trained and available to do. This creates a backdoor pathway that bypasses the Canadian labor market, undermines domestic workforce participation, and contradicts the spirit of Buy Canadian. Where labor market impact assessment or any labor market access pathway is being considered, building trades unions should be formally notified and engaged to ensure that Canadian labor standards are upheld and qualified local workers are given first opportunity to perform the work. These organizations can provide real-time on-the-ground insight into labor availability and help ensure policy intent is respected. So let me be clear. Canadian trades support global investment, but not at the expense of Canadian workers being displaced from work they are fully qualified to perform. When Canadian skilled trade workers are employed, their wages are spent in Canada, they support local businesses and communities, and they contribute directly to Canada's GDP and tax base. When that work is performed by temporary or external labor with limited integration, a portion of the value is lost to the Canadian economy. Buy Canadian is not just about procurement, it is about economic retention and growth. Canada already has the workforce. Policy must ensure it is used. We have invested in it, we have trained it, and we are ready to deploy it. If we are serious about a Buy Canadian policy that strengthens our economy, then we must ensure it includes Canadian workers, Canadian standards, and Canadian opportunities. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now go virtually to Mr. Dilov. Go ahead, sir. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. To the esteemed members of the committee, I would like to extend my appreciation for the opportunity to voice our council's views on the Buy Canadian policy. My name is Igor Delov, and I'm Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations at the Provincial Building and Construction Trades Council of Ontario. We represent 15 unions with a membership of 150,000 construction craft workers in every discipline of the sector, which accounts for 7% of Ontario's GDP. Together with our signatory employer partners, we manage over 100 joint apprenticeship training centers, which prepare the safest, most qualified construction workers who build the homes, roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and energy systems that Ontarians depend on. From a building trades perspective, we're encouraged by the current trajectory of project commitments being made by federal and provincial authorities. We welcome the federal announcement of $115 billion towards infrastructure investments in the next 5 years, which will result in the creation of thousands of training and apprenticeship opportunities and long-term careers in construction. We further salute the government's Buy Canadian procurement policy framework, which will help catalyze domestic production and import substitution. Requiring public procurement authorities to purchase verifiably Canadian-made materials such as steel, aluminum, and lumber makes sense and will help protect and grow Canadian jobs. Furthermore, this initiative augments efforts that are underway to harmonize safety and training standards. Recent provincial legislation in Bill 2 in Ontario, for example, and federal legislation in Bill C5, which are designed to secure seamless labor market credentials across Canada, including in the construction trades. The ultimate goal of harmonization is to achieve a single market, greater worker mobility, and a stronger Canada. We support these objectives as long as we train to the highest health and safety standards. Now, global geopolitical uncertainty seems to be a permanent feature of today's economy. Amid this upheaval, if implemented properly, a Buy Canadian policy has the potential to bolster greater self-reliance to support communities right across our country, while at the same time mitigating risks coming from external factors. In addition to Buy Canadian, the government would be well advised to implement a Hire Canadian campaign. For years, the building trades have called on governments of all stripes to decrease our reliance on temporary foreign labor to build Canada's infrastructure. Relying on the International Mobility Program and the Temporary Foreign Worker Program while ignoring the domestic labor market situation is simply reckless. Under the auspices of the TFWP, temporary foreign workers tend to face exploitative practices such as wage theft, unauthorized deductions, eroded labor standards, poor health and safety conditions, and substandard housing. As we reimagine our procurement policy, we need to reimagine our human resource policy with a view to maximizing opportunities for Canadian residents to join the construction trades, especially at a time when youth unemployment is nearing 15%. Our training providers have no shortage of domestic applicants living in their communities seeking to enter the newest cycle of apprentice recruitment across most trades. In that sense, the Buy Canadian approach can help spur work opportunities in construction, but also more broadly across the entire supply chain, from prefabrication shops to manufacturing facilities. There are pockets of trade-specific unemployment that we need to pay attention to so that we can deploy certified journey persons to projects as quickly and seamlessly as possible. The government has taken steps to incentivize construction work travel through the labor mobility tax deduction for tradespeople, and this is a great step forward. More generally, however, the government must put Canadian workers first on publicly funded projects without exception. The building trades do not accept governments, owners, or employers using excuses like skills shortages, original equipment manufacturer expertise, warranty service requirements, or proprietary technology to circumvent the hiring of skilled Canadian apprentices and journey persons, including those from underrepresented and underemployed communities. Canadians live by the choices that governments make, and we would submit to you that a Buy Canadian, Hire Canadian policy contains the long-term solutions that our economy needs in order to revive growth and secure our economic future. Thank you very much. I would be happy to answer the committee's questions.
With 1 second to spare. Well done. Thank you. We'll start. We haven't got our Unifor witness logged in yet, so we'll start our rounds and we'll keep trying to get Mr. Kluche aboard, but we'll start with Mrs. Block for 6.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses who have joined us today. I want to circle back to a conversation we were having in the previous hour in regards to the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, and I just want to put on the record that in Ontario, both Southern and Northern, the eligibility threshold is 5 or more employees. In Quebec, it's only manufacturing SMEs, and in the Prairies, it's 25% of total business impacted by tariffs. So a business with 50-plus employees could be impacted at 20%, but not be eligible for regional help. And I just put that on the record because we had quite a discussion in the last hour. To the Millwright Regional Council, you mentioned in your remarks you have concerns over labor gaps in the policy. Can you elaborate on that?
What I was referring to is essentially Canadian workers. Like, we're investing a lot of money, whether it's provincially, federally, or municipally, into training skilled trades. But there is the solution is aligning really the policy to match putting Canadians first. And there's a lot of in the free trade agreements, like through the examples I gave, they're allowing, foreign workers to come over for specialists, specialized trades. But when we're seeing, these specialized trades doing the exact same work that our members and our workers do every single day, then that gets concerning, because now you're getting into the general trades. Okay, it's not specialized. Like, we're not saying, there is no need for workers, especially specialists, to come in. We're just saying that worker that can be done here, it is done by the people that are being trained here, spending the money here, and investing here. So that the trade gap really is, we hear the shortage, but quite frankly, we're not seeing the shortage. We're hearing the shortage, but we're not seeing it, quite frankly, yet. Okay, the way that we work is we go job. Not every job is back to back to back to back. Okay, so yes, there is sometimes, last month you could have asked me, I could have said, yeah, we are full out, we're going, we're ready. This week, it's a different conversation now. Okay, it's just the way the industry goes. We go where the work goes, and we need to have it so there's consistent work here. And the work that is being done here, it needs to be done by the Canadian workers that are being trained by all of us. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. How important are zoning and regulatory reforms, more broadly speaking, than just for procurement? Things such as housing construction, which we've seen somewhere in news about decreases in new starts. Can you comment on that?
My expertise is not really in the residential side. I'm more the industrial and manufacturing side. From my conversations that I've heard, it's a lot of it comes honestly to the municipal side with permitting. Like, that's a lot of it. And then you add in the investors or the people that are supposed to build the house aren't building because, one, yes, there's demand, but not the demand at the prices that they're trying to get. So that's really as much as I can speak on for residential or sides like that. So.
Okay, thank you. We saw the government boasting in the spring economic update that the Toronto City Line 2 trains will be 55% Canadian content. How much is normal for labor to take up in a given job or project?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
How much is normal for labor to take up in a given job or project?
As a budget, you're looking probably, I don't know for number, but I would guess about 50% is usually your labor. Usually the equipment takes a big chunk, but labor on any project I would assume would be your biggest expenditure.
Okay, so then not very difficult to get to the 50 or 55% total from there. Okay, thank you. How much time do I have, Chair?
Minute 30.
A minute 30. I am just wanting to ask a comment about an article by Simon Howlett and Andrea Mignon of Simon Fraser University. And in that, the authors note that rather than trying to improve efficiency, government efforts instead have often focused on layering additional requirements on top of an already complex set of bid requirements. Can you comment on that?
Bid processing, that's out of my scope of expertise. I can talk from 7 years ago when I was on the tools, my example of that. But for the current climate, I'm not comfortable answering that about the budget or the estimates of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Danko.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Katruzis and Mr. Delov for joining us. It's really important to have the perspective of organized labor when we're talking about Buy Canadian. And I think you both raised some fairly consistent points about, we're talking about Buy Canadian procurement, but it also has to put Canadian workers first. And I really appreciate the sentiment of also hire Canadian. So, Mr. Katruzis, I'll start with you because you talked about some of the challenges with foreign workers and prioritizing Canadian labor availability. So we have billions of dollars of federal investment going into Build Canada Strong, Build Canada Homes, the Defence Industrial Strategy, all of which we need to make sure that we have labor availability for those programs. And through the Buy Canadian policy, the federal procurement prioritizing Canadian content. So through you, Mr. Chair, can you comment on how we can make sure that we do prioritize Canadian workers for all of that work that's coming through?
First off, the problem isn't with the companies; it's with policy. Okay, these companies and corporations are basically using the loopholes and policy that's available to them in order to make these business decisions, which is get foreign workers to come in using the free trade agreements and labor mobility programs. Okay. Personally, there should be. They used to do it back, a couple decades ago. I tried to get the exact date from some of the older members that are getting into retirement age about when it stopped. But there used to be formal consultation with building trades unions before an LMIA was assessed or any form of mobility pathways are enabled. That kind of went away. Okay, we don't. When we look at LMIAs or any of these programs that are, again, we have to go. Search. There's LMIA.org. There's other things. But what would happen would a resolution to it would be to consult with the building trades affiliates, such as the mill rates, to confirm whether qualified Canadian workers are available and ensure that labor mobility pathways are limited to only specialized work. And that's my goal here. And then you tie in the federal funding to the use of certified trades, apprentices, and then require compliance with the Red Seal trades and the provincial trade standards. We all have a trade code. Okay, every province, territory, they have trade codes for specific work. Yet there's nothing in policy or in the Buy Canada yet that says Canadian workers should be doing it first. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying, don't use foreign workers, because there is a time and a place. Okay, we understand that. It's saying that with all this money being invested and training us, we should be the ones that are doing it, because that would be a direct return on investment.
Thank you. I wanted to give Mr. Delov a chance to also answer the same question and also expand on if we are insisting on public procurement supporting certified and qualified Canadian workers, fair wage policy, union workers in particular. How do we make sure that that is part of the procurement process? And if it does incrementally increase costs, how is that also taken into account when you're going out to tender on these projects?
Thank you very much for the question. And I would echo my colleagues' comments that the main focus is within the policies. So if we tweak the policies, the business response will be commensurate to those changes. We've seen a lot of investments in the training capacity of our organized construction sector to enhance the ability for our affiliates to train the workers that we'll need for these projects that are coming forward. So in terms of meeting that capacity, the investments from the UTIP program, from the Provincial Skills Development Fund programs, these are all meant to augment the existing structure we have where our workers and employers jointly contribute to our apprenticeship training trusts. So we have a very good infrastructure in place. I think really we need to zero in on our international trade agreement obligations and prioritize Canadian workers on that front, and also to focus on our general immigration policy and our existing temporary foreign worker program and international mobility program, under whose auspices a lot of these workers are coming in through those programs. So by investing in our workforce and giving Canadian workers the opportunity to go through an apprenticeship on a major project, that will have spin-off effects locally in the community for years and decades to come. And it won't just create jobs, it'll create careers for those people who will become certified journey persons at the end of that apprenticeship. So, Mr. Danko, I would say to you, we have the infrastructure in place. I think we just need to make some adjustments in terms of how we prioritize the hiring of the people doing the work where the investment is being commissioned.
Just to follow up on that, so if we're going to a Buy Canadian procurement model, Canadian workers, presumably as unionized workers or fair wage policy, through a fair wage policy, would insist on higher wages, which I think is a good thing. But some of the criticism is that we're moving away from a low bid public procurement model. So, Mr. Delov, how would you respond to that kind of criticism that there may be, a higher price with a Buy Canadian policy in place?
In 10 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. Just in a nutshell, labor costs on major projects account for about a fifth of the overall cost. So I know that the 50% number was mentioned earlier, but I think it's closer to about 20%. So that's point number one. Point number two, the spin-off effects of
I have to cut you off there. We are past our time, but perhaps you can provide a further response in writing. Madame Gaudreau, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A question of clarification. Is it working? Are you hearing the interpretation? I'll stop my timer to be sure. Excellent. Things are going very well today, even though it's the end of the session, and we're looking forward to concluding. So, Mr. Kutruzas, when you said that there were consultations with unions, and now there are no longer any, do you know why?
Sure. It was something that I delved into. Like I said, I'm a very firm believer in the people that have worked and gone the same path as I have, that you learn the history. Okay, you try to learn. So I asked the questions. I do ask it. We couldn't find specifically when it was. It was again through the conversations where it was probably the early 2000s, 2010, where we started to see the shift go away, where we weren't even being consulted or sent these LMIAs, because if there was an LMIA or any pathway, it would come to us first, and then we would be able to say, hey, that's not true because we have the labor force. Sorry.
2010.
2010.
Un arrêt.
I'll stop my time. Sorry, no worries. I'm stopping my time to be sure we obtain the information, even if it takes me an extra minute. So I just want to be sure. You said around 2010?
They told it was two separate people that I spoke to where they stopped receiving them between about 2000 2010. So I can't give a firm answer. I did look into that. It was again, it's more okay. Tell me when it stopped. Okay, tell me when the communication barrier started to get obstructed and why we're not being involved with this anymore. Because again,
J'ai une question aussi à monsieur.
I have a question as well for Mr. Delove. I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. Mr. Delove, I'm from the Laurentians. That's where I'm elected. And you probably know that the forestry industry is very important there. And I worked in it for a few years. There are plants that have suspended shifts. They're in jeopardy. They have a lack of liquidity. There are critical minerals like graphite, where just this morning we were told they have to reduce staff. There were 80 before. So we can buy Canadian, but supply chains are not stable. So technically, they would need to be solid. But how do we build housing, homes, the use of the resource when businesses are not even able to provide these materials? What do we do?
That's a really difficult question to address, but I would say in general, we do need to focus on maintaining access to our trading partners, including the United States, which is the obvious one, which is our biggest trading partner. And despite all the difficulties in recent years, I think that's should be a key priority for the government to either renegotiate the free trade agreement or to come to an alternative arrangement with the U.S. bilaterally. But with market fluctuations, it affects everybody. Construction is very cyclical. We have waves of unemployment.
Peut-être que ma question était pas
Perhaps
claire.
my question wasn't clear. I'll ask it differently. Insofar as we want to buy Canadian, the resources we have are having a hard time carrying on because there's a lack of liquidity and managing inventory. And I understand that we can't amend our agreements and our collaboration in North America, but does it make sense that we're not helping upstream directly so we can rubber stamp and say we're buying Canadian? These are people from here. These are owners with workers from here. That was my question.
Yes. So in a nutshell, I think the Buy Canadian policy can help alleviate some of those risks for local communities in forestry, in mining, as long as the federal government uses its great power of procurement to stimulate domestic economic activity to meet those market needs of whatever the projects are. I think that's a good approach that the government is taking. I think we need to work more collaboratively between labor, business, and government to help achieve that. And I think we need more coordination and dialogue to secure those markets domestically in parallel with what's happening on the international trade front. Thank you.
Il me reste quelques instants.
I have a few moments left. I just wanted to share that if the government has attrition, it's cutting jobs. There's no reduction of external contracts, but we need you to let us know how important it is to invest in our people, to have the knowledge to develop skills, and to have the workers right here, because that's not the current trend, and that's why you're here. If you have other information to add, to share with us, please send that to us and we'll include it in our report. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Kluche from Uniform has finally joined us.
Do you want him to?
Nope. We don't have time.
Okay, all right,
Go ahead, sir.
thank you very much. Mr. Katruzis, just at the end of your opening remarks, you made a comment that Canadian workers, Canadian standards, and Canadian industry needs to be involved or be a part of any Buy Canadian strategy that there might be. And you kind of gave that comment in the sense that it's maybe not included or not included in a way that it should be. So I'm just wondering if you had any further thoughts about that, about how our workers or standards in our industry might actually be excluded or impacted, not necessarily in the way that the government is hoping to be.
Sorry, the excluded, again, so I'll give you an example of what's happening. A piece of machinery gets manufactured in South Korea, say, okay, through the free trade agreements there, they're allowed to bring specialists for that equipment into Canada to install, maintain, commission, everything. Jobs that we, like, I'll use Nexstar as an example again, right beside one line that the foreign workers were working, we were right beside them. So the discrepancy between a skilled worker and a general trades laborer, they're meshing them to be one, to get their workers here and not utilize Canadian workers. Like it's a loophole. Okay, it's loopholes that they're using through free trade agreements to get here. Again, it's not the company's fault. They're doing what they are entitled to do. Right. It's our job, or sorry, your guys' jobs to close those loopholes to make sure. Like I said, if we can't supply the manpower in order to complete these jobs, then at least there should be the opportunity for us to, if these pathways are open, that when foreign workers come, that if it is a job that is a union job, that it allows, say, building trades or organizations like myself to make sure that when they come over, they're not being exploited, because that is a big issue with foreign workers right now, is the exploitation, both long-term and seasonal. Okay, and we make sure they're paid right. Safety standards are up to speed to what our standards are. It's because right now it's almost like they if you bring them in, the standards gets lower. But the main thing is when it talks about a return on investments, like it's us that spend the money here. We're the ones going to local shops. We're the ones buying vehicles here. We're the ones buying homes. We're the ones, okay. And when you're talking about we're talking like billions of dollars that have been invested in some of these infrastructure projects, and again, I'll reiterate, the stance needs to be we have the capabilities to do it. Okay, like Canada is a great country. We develop our people properly. Okay, we give them hope that one day they will retire with dignity. And when you have big infrastructure projects like these come, and then we kind of get well, you guys can get what they can't supply, as in the skilled workers or their so-called skilled workers. Okay, so it's just closing that gap where, again, we do it first, then enable to give pathways for those foreign workers to come in if we can't accommodate. But to just bypass us completely and then go into these agreements to bring in foreign workers, that's not. I'm sorry, but that's not right. It really isn't. I think that it's morally wrong. One, I get free trade. Okay, I understand it. For a mill rate's sake, I should say, I'm not an expert on it, but I do understand it. But I also understand we're in a different situation right now where where we actually all question what does free trade mean when we have our biggest support partner to the south of us doing what they're doing. And affecting us. And I think this is where we can all come together. It doesn't matter party affiliation or not, but we can all come together and agree that, hey, Canadians should be first. Okay, we're in unprecedented times. Now should be the time that we actually maybe reassess some of these policies and actually make sure that the people that are devoting their life to a skill in Canada are utilized for that work. That was really extended. I'm sorry, but I had a lot to digest on that one.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I appreciate that. And do you have any, or does your council have any this very specific kind of line items that would create those loopholes that you could submit to this committee in a brief maybe afterwards?
I can get that together for you. I know, well, the next are, like I mentioned, if it's manufacturing, say South Korea, I know Chapter 12 of the South Korea Free Trade Agreement, it notes the labor mobility programs involved with that. But I can get you language on that as well. So,
okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Rochford.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Chair. And it's good that Mr. Koutroussas, you're here to represent the Millwright Regional Council, and Mr. Delave, the Provincial Building and Construction Trades Council of Ontario. And you've touched briefly, both of you, on this matter of opportunity, future opportunity. But I would welcome both of your thoughts in maybe simply on what opportunities do you view emerging from a Buy Canada policy, both for the industries and the workers that you represent in both of your organizations. And so maybe Mr. Koutroussas first, and then Mr. Delave, if you would mind expanding on that. Thank you.
Simply say, like, the most pressing thing right now for the Millwright Regional Council, project wise, would be the St. Thomas, the Volkswagen Power Co plant, because a majority of that work is the machinery install would be considered millwright work. Now we're getting bypassed. Like, I don't know what the final agreements are or anything like that. It's been very, very quiet on that front of any closed door talks. But if it ends up where it is, like just next star alone, we had roughly about 150 displaced millwrights that should have been doing that work, and those numbers are probably going to be exponentially larger at build such as Volkswagen. So that's my direct impact on it. And then as we go, from east to west, companies are paying attention. They're paying attention to these loopholes. And whether we talk about the Trans-Canada corridors or the LNGs or the refineries or building homes, like, these are the things that we have the skills here. The people that work here or the people that we're training here have those skills. And I think it needs to be addressed. And again, it's through policy. It really is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Delave?
Thank you for the question. And to echo my colleague, Mr. Koutroussas' comments, I would just add that across the whole supply chain, including in prefabrication, in the broader manufacturing sector, a Buy Canadian policy would stimulate Canadian jobs domestically, and it would put through more people through our apprenticeship system as well, which we have in the building trades. I know that small and medium-sized enterprises were mentioned earlier in the discussion. So with regard to our affiliated signatory contractors, 80% of them have fewer than 20 employees. And so if we want to achieve business growth, a Buy Canadian policy can really positively affect those numbers going up in terms of businesses hiring more people to meet the work requirements, the project requirements, and employment levels will go up in construction. As I mentioned earlier, we have an issue with youth unemployment in particular, and for young people to look at the building trades as a viable career option, as a sort of first choice option, would go a long way to improving overall employment throughout Ontario and throughout the country.
I really appreciate that comment. I think it's a very important comment that we look at differences. And you point out the differences with smaller contractors that have fewer employees. And so that's an excellent comment. And actually, in the panel before, to your point, they did talk to the importance of ensuring that we look at differences in industry and in workers. And I'm wondering, if just because you've opened up that line of questioning or comment, if you could both expand on that. Are there further differences that we should take into account as a Buy Canada policy is developed, both from a broad perspective and also from an SME perspective, the policy that has yet not been completely finalized? I would welcome your points of views on any differences that should be taken into account. We may be running short on time, so maybe Mr. Delave, if you wouldn't mind expanding further, and then Mr. Koutroussas concluding.
Thank you. So we work very collaboratively with our contractor partners, our counterparts, and I think the procurement rules, as they are, I think achieve a lot of benchmarks that are appropriate to secure fair pre-qualification. And so we want to expand on those to get more registered apprentices onto these publicly funded projects, because that's a win-win, because there are spin-off effects in hiring apprentices. So we want to see a greater expansion of registered apprentices being hired through our smaller contractor employers. That would go a long way in improving the whole system in construction.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's our time, so we won't have a chance to chime in. Madame Gaudreau, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. 2.5 minutes. I'd like to mention that Mr. Cloutier has arrived, the witness. I'd like to ask a question or two, but I think it's important. We don't know what happened. There must be a good reason. Would you be available next Tuesday? We'd like to re-invite you because we're still talking about this.
Tuesday, we might have an opening. So we're following up with Mr. Cloutier right now.
Merci
Please go ahead.
beaucoup. Alors,
Thank you very much. So at the outset, currently, can we talk about a symptom or a problem when we think of a plant, an assembly plant for trucks, the last plant in Canada, it's Packard. Is that an isolated case? Or is there a broader problem with deindustrialization in Canada? No, Packard, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. It's the last truck assembly plant. Just lower your microphone, please.
Vraiment désolé.
Écoutez, I apologize. So, excuse me, I'm sorry I was late. I was mixed up with the time zone. I'm currently in Moncton. So, no, we can't say that the Packard plant is an isolated case. We've seen that in a number of sectors. And one of the elements is that we're not buying local. Packard currently is fighting to have a contract with the city of Laval. But with the lowest bidder policy, because of a 1% difference, they might lose the contract. There doesn't seem to be a real will when it comes time to buy goods and services through public procurement to really consider the impact it has to buy Canadian for this type of product. And it's disastrous because Packard is a plant that can build about 100 trucks per day, and currently they're building 25. So the question is, for how long can a workplace that is made for much more, will it be profitable with 25? And if we lose Packard, we won't build any more trucks in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Cloutier. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation on Tuesday. I will be available.
Mrs. Jansen, please.
Yes, Mr. Delov, we're seeing warning signs across the housing sector. Metro Vancouver just recorded its weakest home sales market in decades. Pre-sale launches have collapsed, and we actually now have developers entering receivership on completed buildings. So if projects stop moving forward, trades workers are going to lose their jobs regardless of what procurement policy Ottawa writes. So my question is at the end of the day, trades workers need projects to actually move forward. Would you agree that an announcement from the government doesn't really help workers if the project is delayed or cancelled?
Yes, insofar as projects are delayed, paused, or cancelled, that's not helpful. But we do welcome shovel-ready projects, obviously, that we want to see our workers be employed on.
Would you, Buy Canadian sounds good, but it has to work on real job sites. Are you concerned that if these rules slow down projects instead of, that they would actually slow down projects instead of helping workers and actually increase projects' cost, which we can see is already high?
Well, I think, in fact, they would help spur greater economic activity domestically. So I think the Buy Canadian provisions are a good thing overall. With regard to delays and administrative roadblocks, I think we can all do better, including the government and the permitting authorities and so forth. Just on your earlier comment regarding the housing, yes, we've seen a major residential construction housing slump in Ontario as well. I can't speak to BC, and this is concerning. But for our members, to an extent, we're also trying to pivot on projects that are outside of the residential sector to keep our members employed.
And was actually when my husband was trying to become an electrician. His dad was an electrical contractor, was in the Liberal downturn, and we ended up going into greenhouses instead because there was no jobs. And we're seeing that again, what's happening now. And so I'm just wondering, how will this second Liberal caused housing downturn impact the trades?
Well, residential accounts for a great share of our members' activity, including our training infrastructure that I talked about earlier. So it is a major concern, but I think the good news is that with the major project being underway in Ontario and other places, there are plentiful employment opportunities as a result of those projects, which we do welcome.
Is there a risk that Buy Canadian could become another layer of red tape on top of an already very complicated construction and procurement system?
I would say the short answer is no, because it would help spur domestic productivity and domestic sourcing of the goods that we need. I think we're very wealthy. We're blessed with softwood lumber and the industries that are with regard to steel and aluminum. If we can match the market need with the producers and what they have to offer, it would be good news for Canadians.
Federal procurement is already really complex. If Buy Canadian adds more conditions without simplifying the process, couldn't that make infrastructure projects slower or harder to deliver? And so therefore you'll have less jobs for your construction workers?
Theoretically, yes, it's a concern, but I think this is a historic opportunity for business and government and labor to come together and reduce those red tape obstacles. I think if we approach this seriously and sort of meet the test of the moment, we have a good opportunity in front of us. So, I think on behalf of labor, we want to be part of the solution in that regard. And a lot of this remains to be seen how it unfolds in the next year. But our principal position is that we do support the Buy Canadian policy. And as I said earlier, we want to see that in conjunction with a higher Canadian policy.
Mr. Delove, what would you say is the most pressing problem for the construction industry right now?
I would say it's the permanent uncertainty that I mentioned earlier, the sense that we have a lot of announcements. We do have some pending projects, but we want to see shovels in the ground quicker, and we want to see our employment numbers go up. Yes, the industry is cyclical.
You're not concerned about the downturn in the housing market? That's not the main pressing problem right now?
I would say it's a part of the problem, but there is a broader sense by which the other sectors are affected by this uncertainty. So if we see projects starting,
I apologize that is our time. Ms. Sutz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to today's witnesses. I think I'll start here in the room with Mr. Koudrousis and then ask the same question online to Mr. Delove. We've heard a lot of a great discussion here today around the Buy Canadian policy. I'm going to kind of jet up 1,000 feet, and I'm thinking about in 5 years from now. I'm thinking about if we were to measure success in 5 years from now, what would that look like? What outcomes would demonstrate that the Buy Canadian procurement policies have been effective in strengthening industry, in supporting workers, and in improving overall our economic resilience? I know, big question.
It's honestly, 5 years from now, success would be that all the projects that have been completed were completed by Canadian workers, and that now enables them, because of their fair wages and prevailing wages that we offer, they're now afforded and can afford to put a down payment on a house or pay for costs of food and whatnot. Like we can go into, whether, post-retirement pension, difference between pensions and RSP matchings and all that, but it comes down to we need people or Canadians making money so we can spend our money here. And everything that I've talked about, yes, I represent a union. Okay, I've obviously my role, but everything we've talked about today hasn't been about union or non-union. Okay, and that's a point that I really, really want to make clear to everybody, that we're talking about Canadians working here. Okay, like a success would be, we gave 5 years of steady income to workers. That to me is a success. And if we weren't able to fill, then we were able to reach out and then go get the support from our free trade partners and enable them to help us. So to me, that would be a success in 5 years.
Incredible. And I forgot a shout out to my local union hall, 93, I believe it is, in Canada. So kudos to the work that they do. And maybe I'll ask the same question online to Mr. Delov.
Thank you. Yes, I think graduating more journey persons through that next 4 or 5 year cycle, having more apprentices registered and employed on these projects would be a fantastic win for communities throughout Ontario and Canada, because earning that journey person certificate means that those workers will have higher wages, better health and safety protections, great mentorship along the way, a lot of supports from our unions. And I think having more durable long-term careers emerge from these opportunities, it would be a win 5 years from now.
Incredible. Thank you both. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Well, we're just on time. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Kluche, again, we'll reach out to you to try and reschedule you. Thank you very much. Before you go, just if you don't mind responding in writing, we have an issue in Alberta, NBC, about illegal trafficked workers being brought in on large federally funded work sites. I wonder if you're able to provide any feedback, if you've heard anything anecdotally or otherwise on that issue to the committee. I'd like to discuss it more, but we are out of time. Thank you very much for being with us today. We are adjourned if there's nothing else.
Thank you.